serious, what is your small town dark secret story?
This was around 15 years ago, but there was a sheriff's deputy that was seemingly a really cool guy. Friendly, cracked a lot of great jokes, etc. He was working at the local high school as a school resource officer and was apparently almost universally well regarded. Well, it turns out that he repeatedly raped a 14-year-old. He told the boy that he'd kill his parents if he reported the officer. I don't remember all the details, but I believe this went on for weeks or months before it was found out and the officer was arrested and eventually went to prison. This is more comical than dark. A house burned down in this small town of 600 population. 1 block from the fire station. It being a volunteer fire department, nobody was at the station. They tried to get the pumper truck out, but one of the volunteers had run it into a brick building the week before and it was still at the shop. We're still undecided whether the house owner burned it down for the insurance. Strange that there was nothing valuable inside. We had a crazy rich guy from the 1600 to 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so decided that when he died he would be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones and his house is a dentist now. This is also the town where that lady went viral going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi a few weeks ago. About 10 years ago a lot of homeless people disappeared, and when the police did the investigation they found out a guy was kidnapping and eating those people. Police found his hideout and found a half-eaten body and bones from another person. People don't like to talk about it, but everyone knows what happened. This is a sad one to me. There was an older couple here who ran a halfway house for troubled kids who'd recently gotten out of juvie. They fostered a few as well. They were loved in the community, wonderful people. One of them had an older brother who was a gangbanger in the nearest big city. During a visit, he snuck his 15-year-old younger bro a handgun. Younger bro ended up holding up a local gas station and killed 3 people. One of them was my friend's cousin. The foster parents lost whatever credentials they needed to do what they did, the kids went back into the system, and the giant house has been abandoned since around 2009. About 30 years ago a local 8-year-old girl went missing during the annual carnival downtown. After a few days they found a suspect that was seen near the girl right before she went missing. The guy confessed to her horrific murder and rape and torture. He was the kid's next-door neighbor and friend to the kid's dad. I'll spare the details, but it was really bad. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years or so. After 8 years he was paroled and returned to the same house with his parents, right next door. Laws were a bit different then, to the family of the girl and former friend. About a week later the man never showed up at his parole office. His parents filed a missing persons report. Rumor has it that several friends of the victim's father took care of him. If you talk to them they just say that they are sure that he won't be back. The town I was raised in wasn't exactly small, but here's the one dark secret I know. My hometown was where lots and lots of sports players had their mansions. And so of course, their wives and children were out and about in the community a lot. Every single sports player wife in that town is heavily addicted to opioids. Every single one. Opioid addiction is obviously an epidemic all over the country, but among the rich wives in the town, it had a 100% infection rate, so to speak. I know because one of my friend's mom was the hairdresser for basically every single one of those wives. I was homeless my senior year of HS, and one of the sports player wives heard about me from her, and she gifted me an iPhone. That phone was pennies to her, but I still wish I'd expressed my thanks more, because that wife died of an overdose not long after. Sorry if that wasn't much of a dark secret, but yeah. About 40% of my hometown was homeless. No one had jobs, no one could afford any kind of housing situation. Neighbors paid for heat where they could on houses people were squatting in, and everyone invited everyone else over for dinner every night. We didn't know who was homeless, we just did it. We hired anyone and everyone for odd jobs. A lot of people just lived as they would when they were kids, keep the fireplace going with trees you chopped down, gathered water by the well and traded, farmed and trapped for food. I went to school with a lot of homeless kids. We had, looking back, the most robust school breakfast program I've ever heard of. I thought it was normal for over half the school to show up until I moved to the city. You just gave people the dignity they deserved. No one was shamed if they dropped out at grade 10. We all knew that if they needed the job they should take it. Looking back I realize how wild it is. Our town was so poor and no one was treated any different by me and mine at least. Sure, there were some rich people, but they overwhelmingly went to the other school. And there were no panhandlers, no beggars, nothing like that. I was just told the Buseys were coming over for dinner. Did I like them? No, I kinda think they were dicks. But never did I make them feel uncomfortable, and most just ate, had some tea, and left. And if that doesn't tickle your fancy, a whale washed up on shore one week and all the guys in the local high school took turns having sex with it. All of them. Edit. To clarify, the whale part happened after I graduated by a few years. It was a very public thing when it was happening and no one likes to talk about it since. Some high school football players shoved broomsticks up freshman players' asses in the locker room after a practice. The coach found out and did nothing about it. The whole town knew and nothing happened to anyone in the form of punishment. Every game for the rest of the year, opposing teams' fans brought broomsticks to games. Edit. Many people have asked which town this is. I'd rather not say specifically, but it is in the northern part of Illinois. See 2002-03. Edit number 2. The amount of different cases that have come up in this comment section have blown me away. I'm so happy I shared this to shed some light on how much larger this problem is than I thought. We have a Vineyard Hill next to our village. On that hill there's a big wooden cross. Lots of people go there to drink, have a walk or with their dogs, but almost nobody knows why the cross is here. During war, a vineyard keeper lived there with his son. His son was recruited and the man was left alone. When war ended, his son survived and wanted to prank his dad by sneaking on him at night. But vineyard keeper saw him and thought he was a robber, so he grabbed his rifle and shot the robber. When he found out it was his son, it broke his heart. He dug a grave on top of the hill for his son and erected a big wooden cross next to the grave. When he was done, he laid next to his son and shot himself. From that day, no one worked on the vineyards and there's a big wooden cross on top of the hill. Now, you can't even recognize there's a grave. As a teen in high school, the health teacher got caught sleeping with student. Everyone magically passed that year, including me, who skipped almost every day. Lol. Then a few years ago in another small town, 2 different scandals within the space of 5 years. First one, teachers at a preschool were dosing children with melatonin at nap time. Second one, a very well-known and respected funeral home went under investigation for selling body parts. Edited to clarify, events were in different towns. There was a woman who was cheating on her husband and got pregnant with him. When she has the child, it was quite clearly not the husband's child, so he kicked her out of the house. The woman broke down and went out drinking. Then when she was about to return to her husband, she picked her baby up, dropped it down a rubbish chute and left it there. The next morning she remembered what she did and went back to find the baby, but of course only people with access to the chute can go inside, so she had to wait hours, possibly days, for someone to unlock it and go inside. The baby was long dead by then. The woman killed herself shortly after. This developed into a ghost story later. People say you can hear the baby crying from inside the rubbish chute, and you can hear the woman crying on one of the stairways. I think I was senior in high school when this happened, but it was in our local paper every day for a long time. The details are hazy, but I'll do my best to recount them. 4 athletic male students had sexually assaulted a female sophomore student. One male had access to keys of the room it happened because his parent worked for the administration. They apparently picked her up to get food and then went to the school locker room. 2 of them pressured her to participate in an act she did not want to and thought she was in physical danger had she not done anything. The female student 100% went to court, and then they completely turned it around on her, that she asked for it, that it was her fault, etc. They said if she really did not want to comply, she would have fought harder or her clothes would have been torn or bloodied up. She just left that school and moved instead of staying. I don't believe much happened to the male students at all. As for the male students, no one had to register for anything, no one went to jail, their futures were all intact. I think 2 had to do service hours and probation, but that was it. Not too dark but yeah, Shady AF. Guy, blue collar, but running for a local political office, comes home to his wife of 7 years. Finds her being shagged by some guy. He whips out a gun and shoots the guy a few times. The man survives. Finds out that his wife was cheating on him and it wasn't rape. Here is where it gets dirty. So, the police want to press charges against him for attempted murder, since they say he knew his wife played around. So the DA comes to him and tells him to stop running for office and withdraw. He does and the charges go away. No crime here, folks. 2 stories. A neighboring town had a young high school girl killed by a train. She was walking home from school and went across the railroad tracks. There was no warning indication as the indicators didn't trigger at the time. A malfunction was to blame. The girl was run over and cut right in half. There is a memorial still in place by the railroad tracks years later. There's also a man in our town that claims to run a disposal business. What ended up happening was when the townspeople paid this man for hauling out their garbage or unwanted materials, he dumped them around abandoned buildings, sides of the road and even behind a local mechanic shop. He was then quickly banned from posting about his business, and he still tries to pull this stuff to this day. He's been banned on all the forums after this incident. Edit. I'm sure some will be asking where was this? I won't say the town name, but this happened in the northern part of the Midwest. Not so much a secret, but the city where I grew up in eastern MA became rather infamous thanks to the opioid epidemic. One of our T stations, neighborhoods became a memetic, junkie central. That's how bad it was. There's also a number of bodies found here that have been attributed to Whitey Bulger and his gang, found buried under bridges, along beaches, even one in a tuxedo found in a car, riddled with bullets, that was submerged in a quarry, and a torso stuffed in plastic found in a creek, where I took part in a yearly summer sailing, kayaking program for kids, in the mid-90s. Town in Africa I visited as part of a uni thing, basically had a guy way back when who was running to clean up the area. Apparently there had been a lot of white murders, some ritualistic thing where their ears were being cut off, and at the time, white voters had a lot more power than black voters there. Anyway, his campaign is he'll stop the white murders, and he gets elected on this hard on crime attitude, and, suddenly, they stop. Everyone's super stoked, until time goes by and they are not just reduced, but non-existent, overnight, with no real action or people brought to justice. Anyway, everyone starts investigating him. Eventually this spills over to a bunch of folks forming a bit of a mob and charging into his office to try find a ledger for paying off the gangland people. They don't find a ledger. They found an earbox. A girl I went to high school with vanished one day. From day one everyone was telling the police that her ex-boyfriend had something to do with it. She already had a restraining order cause he held a knife to her throat and threatened to kidnap and kill her, but with no evidence they couldn't do anything. Over the years several people went to the police saying that he had admitted to killing her, but they did nothing. He eventually got in trouble for threatening to kill another girlfriend and choking her and went to prison for 3 years. After prison he came back to town and eventually asked another ex of his for a ride home from a party, and then she went missing after that night and they found her car burned and they arrested him again and he had burns on his hands. A few months later someone found a set of remains outside of town, and during the recovery they found another set of much older remains. He killed them both, and the failure of our local police department caused the second girl to be murdered. This event was so bad, Coatesville was removed from maps for a bit. I borrowed this from our Wikipedia page. In August 1911, steelworker Zachariah Walker was lynched in Coatesville. He had left his wife and children in Virginia while seeking better work. This African-American man was accused of killing Deputy Constable, coal and iron policeman Edgar Rice, a popular figure in town. Walker claimed self-defense and was hospitalized after his arrest. He was dragged from the hospital and burned to death in front of a mob of hundreds in a field south of the city. 15 men and teenage boys were indicted, but all were acquitted at trials. The lynching was the last in Pennsylvania and is said to have left a permanent stain on the city's image. Ooh, so many. Guy killed his cousin in a hunting accident as teens, except both were experienced hunters and the cousin was wearing orange. Few years later the guy was arrested for killing a man and kidnapping, raping, and then killing his wife. Many also believe he committed another murder, arson that happened in the years between the two other incidents, but it's never been proven. A girl was abducted from her car and her body was found several days later 100 miles away. Nobody was ever arrested although the boyfriend was accused. Also a girl I went to high school with had an affair with her friend's dad when she was 17 and he was 45. Ick. Does anyone remember a few years back when a bunch of people were dying of lung diseases caused by illegal THC vape cartridges? Well, turns out a guy the first went to high school with was running one of the biggest THC cartridge operation in the Midwest, if not the entire country. His mom and brother were in on it too and had multiple locations where they were paying people to manufacture, pack and distribute the cartridges. Early 90s, an Amber Alert for a missing 6-year-old boy goes out. Everybody is out searching. The family cries on national TV, begging for the return of their son, the youngest of 4 children. Everybody thinks it's kidnapping, because a couple of months before a child was abducted for ransom in a nearby town. The boy is found dead. The coroner finds signs of sodomy and semen. Turns out, the crying father was sexually abusing his children, along with children of his brother. Late 90s. A group of bored housewives decide to cheat on their husbands. Their target group is boys between 12 and 16 years old. They have some massive orgies. Got caught when one of the boys ended in the hospital with an OD of Viagra. While it made national news, it was covered up by the cuckolds. They had power and money. Early O. A gang of teenage boys raped 3 special needs girls. Their downfall was they taped it and bragged about it. A popular yoga teacher trainer, studio owner known and respected not just here but all over the US was caught not only cheating on his second wife with his current GF and business partner, but it was revealed in the last year that he had groomed and raped the second wife's 17-year-old niece. She didn't come forward until last year BC. He had said it was in the best interest of spirituality to keep it secret, and talking would ruin the spiritual bond, gag. He still has his studio, his GF, his license to teach, train yogis, and is now getting a master's degree in psychology at a prestigious Ivy League school despite the allegations. I took teacher training with him several times and I can attest to the fact that he is pervy, but also that he's very charismatic and intelligent, getting people to drink the Kool-Aid shell out the big bucks and for his guru pies to fawn over him. Typical narcissistic garbage. A guy the first went to high school with threw a trailer hitch at an indigenous woman and yelled, "Got one," when he did. She suffered terrible injuries and was in the hospital for months before eventually dying. She had some other health conditions that didn't make it easy for her to stay alive. He was being tried for aggravated assault first, then they brought it up to second-degree murder. It's been brought down to manslaughter because they didn't have enough evidence to charge it as murder. He pleaded guilty to the manslaughter charge. My city is plagued with a major prejudice to the indigenous people. My family was the same way. I grew up thinking it was normal and said some terrible things. I realized I didn't even know why I had this hate. I did a 180 on that a while ago. This is how a lot of the town is, and the sad part is there are so many people in the city that are on this guy's side, because she was going to die anyway, because they were just looking for hookers, or she was drunk, basically anything to cover up what they really mean, because she is native. Shit like this is normal here. The police have labeled some deaths as accidental drownings, even though it's clear that they didn't just fall into the river. Someone I knew was picked up and almost thrown in themselves if it wasn't for a stranger. Canada has a lot of issues like this already, the tragedies surrounding the indigenous people. But our city is one of the worst. Seeing people discarded like that makes me feel disgusted and guilty to have been proud to be Canadian. There was a serial killer in my hometown who was never caught in the 70s. We always believed it was one of our neighbors, was extremely creepy and met the age timeline, but there was no confirmation. The neighbor kept wolves on leashes he had purchased and bred, so nobody could come near his house. He always gave my dad the creeps, and he came and snuck in our yard and tried to talk to me and my kid sister when we were 5/7 playing outside, and my dad had to run him out of our yard at gunpoint. Well, the man died without ever being convicted, but he passed on to his son a sick obsession with John Wayne Gacy, and his son ended up killing his mother and putting her in a concrete barrel under the porch. He is still in prison, and we still believe his father was that killer from the 70s, especially since he passed that on to his son, who became a murderer obsessed with serial killers. Some decades ago, one of the teachers of our elementary school was a pedophile, and would regularly take a pupil with him up to his lodge, where he did stuff. The people that were harmed are now in their 40s, and either need lots of therapy, damaged beyond the point where therapy can bring them back, or dead, suicide. Knowing this, and then looking at the poor weirdos of our village, I feel so sorry for them. In my country, crime is pretty high and weird shit happens all the time. Basically, the closest I have to a small town dark secret is when a manhole was overflowing and 2 aborted fetuses, from some back alley abortion clinic, washed out of it. The police released a statement saying that you shouldn't use these clinics, despite the fact that there are literally adverts for it everywhere for years. Oh, finally I have a story to tell on this thread. First team rugby player and 2 younger boys in high school made a pornographic video with a female student in a park. I've never seen the video, but apparently they showed it to a few people. Got expelled. In a town of 20,000 people, it sure was the talk of the year. Another story I can add is that my family farm and where we lived was close to a very famous ghost story based on true events. Newlywed bride died in a car accident and is forever standing on the side of the road being seen by passerbys. Each country has a similar story, Ghost of Uniondale. Not a dark secret but just sad history. This is my favorite story as it's actually true and so frightening. I don't remember the detail, but close to my hometown a woman was raped and her belly and neck was sliced open. Apparently she put back her intestines, held her head right and crawled back to civilization. She survived and wrote a book. Pretty horrifying details if you research it. Book is called I Have a Life, documentary is called Allison. Thanks for the others who mentioned it in the comments. My hometown has a lot of travelers. Recently shouted out on a TV show as having one of the highest number of travelers sites in our area in the UK. A few years ago the police did a raid on a site and found 24 people being kept as slaves. They think some of them may have been slaves for over 15 years. The travelers preyed on the vulnerable, often approaching people at soup kitchens or benefits offices and offering them cash in hand for a day's work. But when they arrived at the site they had their hair shaved off and were kept in old horse boxes and dog kennels. A few newspapers have described the conditions as like a concentration camp. This might get lost, but there was, and I think there still is, I don't live there, a small local charity society that met at a local restaurant. One of the biggest things they did was a clothes and food drive, usually around the holidays between Thanksgiving and Christmas. They would take donations throughout the year, but this was the only time they advertised it or had members actively out collecting clothes, canned food. There were rumors that some members would use these donations to lure in homeless people in a large adjacent city and murder them. There was an investigation by the police, but it went nowhere. There is, however, a small spike in missing persons reports around the time of year in that city. Not really dark, but there was an old man who would cut, chop, and stack his own firewood all summer and fall to heat his house during the winter. One year someone started stealing wood from his pile at night, which was really unnecessary because if they had just asked him he probably would have given them whatever they needed. It went on for a few weeks and the local cop couldn't really do anything about it. So the old man bored holes into a few logs and filled them with black powder and plugged the bores. Like a week later a house on the other side of town's fireplace blew out. No one said anything at all. We pretty much all agreed they deserved it. This recently became not secret, but it was secret from 1973 to 2017. I was the same age as the girls involved. In 1973, 2 13-year-old girls were found raped and murdered in a field in my hometown. The small town police department investigated forever, but could never identify any suspects. In 2017, they decided to see if any DNA was on any of the items recovered at the crime scene. They identified 2 suspects. One of the suspects was the neighbor of one of the murdered girls. He remained a neighbor of her family until the day of his arrest. The other one had moved out of state, but got extradited back here. The murders changed our lives on a dime. Our parents were always really lenient about our whereabouts. I could leave the house on a Saturday morning and not return until 7 p.m. and it was no problem. Obviously, this was before cell phones, so it's not like our parents could even reach us. With the murders, that all came to a screeching halt.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like the video. And if you are new, subscribe and click on the bell icon.